Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
My name is Ali Masood Kobir. I am from Bangladesh.
From Bangladesh, yes.
Huzur, about the question I want to ask you that about the Mojeza, the miracles what when we read in the Surah Baqarah about the Moses that he divided the sea.
That's right.
And when I read the explanation, then I saw that the explanation is given according to our Jamaat, that is logical and historical like this. But then the question arises in my head that when Muhammad al-Islam, I don't remember exactly, he wrote something and the God Almighty Allah signed that, then the ink fall down. So what is the explanation of that?
You see, it is not as your question is very valid. I'm glad that you think very intelligently and ponder over these things.
Right.
The explanation given by us is a suggestion. It could be another explanation. And the recent discoveries, archaeological discoveries, are in fact opening new possibilities as to what might have happened.
Right.
Because it is reported that about in the time of Moses, in the Mediterranean, an island erupted with such force as it sent mountain-like waves rushing towards the Mediterranean soil. Egypt being one of those places which stood by the mouth of the Mediterranean, by the side of the Mediterranean. So some scholars have suggested that that special event must have taken place during that time. The Mojeza was not that Moses crossed the sea, because he crossed at a time when it was the time of the ebb, when the waves had ebbed out and the water from the flow of the Nile was not sufficient to drown the people there, because it was a delta area and the water was spread out. But as Pharaoh entered, that tidal wave, which was specially created by that explosion in the Mediterranean, that hit Pharaoh and his people. And it as if it was the two mountains had got together. That was the time when there was also a wave of flood from the Nile. And sometimes, if in the catchment area of the rivers there is a great sudden onslaught of rain, then the flood waves sometimes travel in very big height, having a front before them. And this is a common phenomenon known everywhere in the world. In the floods, sometimes a very high tide travels so fast that as if a wall is moving. So that happened. This is Mojeza, the timing of the two things. On the one hand, there was a flood tide advancing rapidly towards the mouth of River Nile, and on the other hand, the sea swelled because of this great explosion caused in a small island, which was destroyed, in fact. The timing of the both was exactly when Pharaoh and his followers were crossing the River Nile. So this is also an explanation. But the explanation does not mean that it is naturally possible to have it happen. The timing, the organization, the perfect separation of the right from the wrong, while God had promised Moses that you would be saved, all these together make it a Mojeza. So a scientific explanation does not take away the wonder from a Mojeza. It still remains a Mojeza. Now, the Mojeza which you mentioned about Masih is something which happens rarely, but does happen. And it happens not as a sign of truth to the non-believers. It always happens within the community of the believers. So this is what should be remembered. Such mojizat as are freaks of nature, which we cannot understand, they are never presented to the enemies. They are shown within the community of the believers. Like Hazrat Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is reported to have invited the entire participants in the jihad of Ahzab, when Ahzab had got together, and the Muslims were around how many thousand? 7,000 or less? No, they were less in number. Anybody remembers? There were certainly more than the participants of an Uhud.
Yeah.
Because Islam had spread further by the time of Ahzab. So all who were involved in digging the channel to separate, to save the Medina territory from the invading tribes, Hazrat Rasulullah Sallam was once invited during those days when hunger was striking hard at them by some devout companions of Hazrat Rasulullah Sallam, whose wife had slaughtered a goat and had cooked some rice and things, and she sent her husband to Rasulullah Sallam and conveyed, it was not rice, it was the bread she was cooking. She sent the message that you come along with a few. I have that much food to offer you. So Ahmad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, instead of choosing a few, he sent the word to all the people who were involved there in digging the channel, and they all thronged around the house of that lady. Naturally, she was amazed. I don't know what the number exactly was. It couldn't have been a few thousand, but it was still a large number who responded to the call and who reached in time to participate in that food. Rasulullah told her to cover the cauldron where something was cooked, good meat was cooked, and cover that we call parat, that dish where kneaded flour was kept with some cloth. And he prayed over it and said, now start cooking the bread and distributing the food. And very authentic reporters tell us that they kept on distributing the food, and neither the kneaded flour ended nor whatever was cooked of meat in the cauldron finished until everybody was fed. And when this was over, then there was enough left for the family to eat. Now, this is something which is not presented for the non-believer's eyes. Such mojizat take place only to increase the faith of those who have already believed. Because about the mojizat, such mojizat, the Holy Quran says, never have people benefited from mojizat. When have they? Pharaoh and his people, despite seeing so many mojizat, still rejected the truth, and it all happened also at the time of Jesus Christ. He is known to have shown many mojizat, but how many could he convert? 30 at most, two of which had renegated, of course. So this is the nature of mojizat. There is some mojizat are called khawariq adat. They're freak of nature. They're in breach of apparent breach, not real. Apparent breach of the laws of nature. Such mojizat take place not for the enemy's eyes, but for the eyes of the believers. And this is the Mojeza which you have mentioned is just one of those.
So you see, on that point, the problem comes. One of my friend, I gave him the books from Muslim Islam. So he said me that he believed Muslim Islam. He is the promised Messiah, but he doesn't interested. He didn't say I don't believe like all the Khaliphas later, because he say when I also present him the Quran, he said the way it was, the explanation was given, that our Jamaat want to show that more logic, the history and more logic like this. So
because the Holy Quran is a logical book.
Right, but in this point, when I say about the Mojeza, he said Mojeza is like a, to him it's like a magic or something. So he keep believe on that.
So I have told you two incidents. Number one, that which took place in the small room by the side of the Mosque Mubarak.
Yeah.
And the other Mojeza which was seen and witnessed by a large number of people at the time of Hazrat Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. But it was not presented to the non-believers, not even quoted to them. There is not a single hadith informing us that Sahaba started telling the non-believers that this is the Mojeza, so you better accept the truth of Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So there are two different types of Mojezat. But still, it is for you to convey as best as you can. If he is not guided, it's not your responsibility. Right? Thank you. Thank you. Lady side?
The instruction from the police about sparking of some car.